Thank you, everyone, for joining me today on another episode of Talking Cloud. Now, this is where we talk about cloud, all things cloud, anything cloud. I mean, man, cloud is such an enormous word today, and it's literally a computing technology that's seeping into every aspect of our lives. Now, you've heard me say it, and I'm no expert. But man, I do know how to find the experts, and I'm super excited today because we have a unique, different perspective, a higher level perspective, I would say, one from an executive that we've maybe not had on the program so far. And I think that we're really going to get some keen insights to how the C-suite and how the CIO specifically might be looking at cloud and cloud security and the things that he or she looks for throughout the day as we're making this rapid digital transformation kind of been forced on us in the last year or so. So today, the resume's so long. Look, the guy's an official member of the Forbes Technology Council. Okay. He's a speaker. He's an author. He's an explorer. He's the founder and manager of Indy CIO Network. There's many other things that we're going to be able to talk about today with Jeffrey Ton. He's long in technology. This is just really going to be a lot of fun. And I think what's going to be exciting about talking with Jeff is he's going to give us some insights from a different perspective on how the information manager and information executive is looking at security and cloud throughout the enterprise. So, man, I'm super excited to have you here, Jeff. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Grant, it is fantastic to be here. I can't wait to get into our conversation.
Yeah, this is awesome. So why don't you, I did a meager job really talking about, I didn't even talk about Intervision and all the other stuff. Why don't you take a minute or two and give the Z-axes for our listeners?
Sure. So I've been involved in technology since the age of the dinosaur, I think, about 40 years, a wide variety of roles. I grew up on the software development side of the house. Back in the day, we called us programmers, not devs. But I grew up smashing code in the technology industry, and was really going to do that my whole career, is what I thought when I started out. Right? We all have those visions of this is what my career is going to be, and long about the mid 90s, got drug kicking and screaming to the management side and found out that not only did I love it, but I was fairly decent at it. And so went from that perspective into a wide variety of roles in management. Was working at that time for a global organization, about 60,000 employees. I love to say, because it sounds so cool, I had staff in Paris, so I spent a lot of time in Paris managing that staff, and really spent a lot of time on airplanes for a long time. Global organization, right?
Right.
I got the itch that what I really wanted to do was be the CIO, be the Chief Information Officer. I had this desire to architect, if you will, a department in the way that made sense to me. And so I got a CIO gig at a commercial real estate developer and spent about 4 years, maybe 5 with them. And then moved on and was CIO for a large nonprofit for about 5 years. And then in, I guess it was around 2015, I like to joke and say I moved to the dark side because I became a vendor, and I joined a cloud company, a company that was known then as Blue Lock. Blue Lock was a leader in disaster recovery as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And we were acquired a couple of years ago by Intervision Systems, which is where I spent the next couple of years of my career as an executive with Intervision. And then about a year ago, I launched my own company, which you mentioned, Ton Enterprises, and Amplify is kind of the brand that I use for that. I've been doing a lot of writing and speaking, workshop facilitation, and some coaching.
And I bet probably spending a little bit of time on Zoom.
Yes. Haven't we all spent a lot of time on Zoom in the last year?
Yeah. Well, you talk about spending a lot of time on planes, Jeff. In 2019, I flew 270,000 miles.
Wow.
In 2020, I was on the plane once for work. So it was a pretty drastic change for me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was kind of the way. My 2019, I think I was on 29 or 30 different trips that year. Nowhere near the miles that you had, because you must have been traveling a little bit internationally. I was just domestic. But it was a drastic difference. And now it's like, today, I get about 3 months per gallon of gas.
Boy, isn't that right? There are a number of things I think that are pretty remarkable when you really stop and look at how much different they were throughout that calendar year compared to the ones we've had previous. That's for sure. So, wow, man, as you talk about your career and your decision to move first into management and then subsequently want to be a CIO. I've said many times, I'm no professor, I'm the Gilligan. I would love to hear, Jeff, you describe in a sentence or two a CIO. What's a CIO? I mean, I think everyone knows CEO, Chief Executive Officer, okay, he or she runs everything. But and I think I know some of the answer, but I'd love to hear it from a CIO.
Wow, that is such a great question, and I think part of the challenge with defining that role is it continues to evolve.
Yes,
as the business needs change and the business demands change, that role has evolved. And today, I think the role of CIO not only is in the caretaking and management of the technology assets of the company, which is kind of where the role was born 25 years ago, but also to know more and understand more about the business so that they can help guide the company strategy from a technology lens. Because it's the business strategy that comes first, right? We say that a lot, but not everybody really sees the role of the CIO that way. But I view it as my job is to understand and be a part of the business strategy, so much so that my technology strategy, my department's technology strategy, helps fulfill that vision.
Right.
And you can bring solutions to your business peers that they never even dreamed of because you understand the technology and you understand the business. So we've got that caretaking responsibility of managing those technology assets. But I think we also have the responsibility to drive that strategy forward. And I think we were talking just a second ago about some of the impacts of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I see that as one of the biggest, I'll use air quotes that your audience can't see, but positive that came out of the last year is there's this whole new alignment between the business leaders and the technology leaders in getting things done, which is fascinating.
It was forced, wasn't it, Jeff? I mean, I think everybody was kind of tootling down the digital transformation trail, right, at varying speeds, with some eager and some not really even caring. And then all of the sudden, perfect word, alignment, everyone became aligned with the same objectives. I've got to work when I'm not there.
Yeah.
I've got to be able to get to that from this device, not yours.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine that's a CIO here in central Indiana, where I'm talking to you from now. He related that he's had conversations with his business peers about what they're calling pandemic mode. And they were like, we hope we never go back to the way it was before. We want to stay in pandemic mode. In other words, that heightened sense of alignment, that heightened agility as they're trying to get things done. I mean, just look at the amazing things that have happened in the retail space in the last year because of what was forced on us with the pandemic. I think McKinsey said that we saw 10 years of technology adoption in 3 months.
Wow.
During the pandemic.
Wow.
And kudos to those CIOs who were in those retail organizations that helped drive that change.
Yeah, no kidding. You said something, Jeff, I want to, I guess, kind of pull on this thread a little bit, because you made a statement, and it was the words you used I thought were really significant. You said the lens of technology. You referred to the business goals and objectives, and the CIO's job is to drive those business objectives while looking through the lens of technology. And I think that, for me anyway, I really see how that explains more on what a CIO is all about. He or she's not necessarily the curators of the technology as much as being able to see through it and the benefits it can provide. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes. It's been we were talking before we went on the air. It's been a long time before or since I configured a router or coded a program, right? But I know and understand the value that technology can bring to an organization. And one of the things I love about InterVision is our mission and vision is to transform business through the evolutionary power of technology. To me, that's what I've been trying to do my whole career, is transform business through the evolutionary power of technology, because it can change business, but it's not technology for technology's sake. And again, we all say that. We all say, oh, it's not technology for technology's sake, but you really have to believe it. Yeah. Because it's really that mindset of what's the business trying to achieve? What's the customer experience like? And how does our technology help further that vision of the overall organization?
Right. It's extraordinary. And I had this conversation with Brendan Stavely, who was on the program in my previous episode. And he's the America sales leader for AWS security at Amazon. And we had the discussion, and it's really quite fascinating that the whole notion of AWS EC2 was born out of necessity. Right? The fact that they needed an environment that could breathe and take deep breaths when needing to scale and exhale when business was low, right? I find it fascinating that what really drove what we now know today as cloud overall was a business case relating to solving business problems. I think it's amazing.
It is. When I was working for InterVision and Blue Lock, the disaster recovery as a service, we always used to say, never let a good, compelling event go to waste.
Exactly.
Right. And it's that same thing. It's born out of necessity that we do this. And I love the way that you were talking about it in that episode, in that it allows you to breathe. I love that humanization of the concept because that's exactly right. I think one of the major advantages of cloud is the elasticity, the ability to scale up, but also the ability to scale down, that breathing that you were talking about. To me, that's by far the biggest advantage to going to cloud from the seat of the CIO.
it's the old notion of supply and demand, right? I mean, you're aligning that. It's funny. So I had this conversation because my kid was asking me, why can't I buy toilet paper? I mean, why is there such a shortage on toilet paper? This was a few months ago, right? And I explained to him, and you know this, there's no toilet paper shortage. But our economy, and this I remember back when I was at Apple in the 80s, it was really the buzz, just-in-time manufacturing. Yes. Right? This whole move away from Kimberly-Clark having warehouses and warehouses full of product, they started saying, hey, we should build what we need if we do a better job tracking our orders. And that's where the world evolved. So that the supply chain knows we use 643,000 rolls of toilet paper a week, and so they make 650, and that's what happened, because all of a sudden there was a run on toilet paper and it disrupted that just-in-time process. But I guess that's a long way of getting to, that's what cloud enables us to do with compute, right? To really have it just in time, whether it's just in time to reduce it or just in time to increase it.
Yeah, it's that elasticity, and I think that was one of the major drivers when I was CIO. We went on a large cloud initiative at the nonprofit that I was CIO for. From about 2010 to 2015, we ended up migrating almost everything except perhaps some domain controllers, file servers. Everything else ended up being in the cloud because it gave us that elasticity to be able to scale up, scale down. Yep. It also gave us the agility, which in my mind is a little bit different. It's agility from that perspective is the ability to pivot the business. This nonprofit loved to fire up new lines of business just to see if they'd work, new services, new mission. And so we'd be able to fire those up without a large capital investment. And if they worked, awesome. If they didn't, we could peel them back down again. So you get that agility and elasticity.
Fail fast. Right? To be able to, try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you can adjust quickly. And I think you're exactly right.
You can do that in the cloud.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, now when you look at the cloud, I mean, back then, it's pretty extraordinary now how, Jeff, the cloud is really become a platform that's so much larger when you go from, just a basic, AMI or image all the way to infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, the whole Terraform world. I mean, there's so many functions. I mean, it's gotten enormous.
Amazing. Yes. I did a webcast recently for Intervision, and we talked about on that webcast looking at it from the seat of the CIO, so from the perspective of the CIO, but on the impacts on his or her team. And so we talked about transforming your team, because you're right. You just rattled off several different technologies that 10 years ago no one was using.
Yep.
And you have a lot of these architects and engineers that grew up handling the hardware and writing configurations a device at a time. And now all of a sudden you put them in this infrastructure as code. And in a sense, you've turned a lot of infrastructure engineers into developers.
Yep.
And they have no offense to those folks. They have no idea what it means to write code that's maintainable, repeatable, and all those things that they teach us that grew up on the coding side of the house. That was all foreign to them.
Yeah.
And so this mind shift and culture shift that you have to go through is just an incredible change that when you're talking about a cloud journey, a lot of times it gets overlooked because we're focused on the technology and not on the people that have to change.
Yeah, boy, no kidding. And the rate of change, I had another guest here, Mike Morato, great guy, and he was talking when he was at Visa and some previous experiences on the approach. And the approach was, well, this is how we did it on-prem, so this is how we'll do it in the cloud. And he admitted it was a tragic, catastrophic mistake, because you're setting yourself up for failure if you go into the environment thinking it's like the old one, right? It really is. Yeah. There's a lot of new learning. And how does, from an organizational perspective, how at the executive level, how do you instill that need for unlearning? Because that's kind of what it is.
It is. I think that's one of the challenges that face CIOs quite often. Obviously, I have a soft spot in my heart for the CIO. I think part of it starts with, it sounds too simple. It starts with the why. Why are you going to cloud in the first place? So it starts with what's your strategy, and then it's what's your plan. I can remember this was, probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I asked a room of CIOs how many had some workloads that were running in the cloud. There was probably 30 people in the room, and of that, I'd guess 28 raised their hand. They have workloads in the cloud. Mm-hmm. The next question I asked, Grant, was, what's your strategy? No one had a strategy. They were all in the cloud, but they were kind of there by accident almost. Yeah. So I think you have to know your why, and then you have to have your strategy defined. And part of that strategy has to be, how do you bring the people along? Here's a great example of, I'll fall on the sword and talk about one of my failures in leadership. I was CIO for that nonprofit, and we were moving our email to the cloud. It was our first step. We'd not done anything else with cloud per se, but that was our first step along that journey. And so we formed a team, and we did a competitive analysis against this provider and that provider, and we ended up choosing Google for our email. Mm-hmm. And then we started the migration, and we launched, and everything was great. And 2 weeks after we went live, my senior systems engineer came into my office and resigned, because even though he was on the team and even though he helped decide, he always saw himself as an exchange guy. He couldn't see himself in the new future. I had failed to paint the picture for him of what his role, his contribution, his value would be to the organization in the future. Huh. Fast forward a couple of years, well, probably a year and a half, I'd learned my lesson, and we were looking at leveraging disaster recovery as a service as our next step in the cloud. And I had a different systems engineer at the time, because the last one had resigned. Mm-hmm. And I sat him down, and we spent a lot of time talking about his role, what it meant for him, what it meant for the organization to go down this path, and what he'd be able to do if he didn't have to spend all his time, or a majority of his time, worrying about this part of DR and that part of DR. And, Grant, he ended up being the champion of that initiative. And then later, he would spend time in the business, observing the business from using that technology lens. And he was able to redesign, at that time, it was a pretty large retailer that we were working for. And he was able to redesign the checkout process to speed up the checkout lanes. Wow. Had he been spending months doing his disaster recovery preparedness and test and all those kinds of things, right, he never would have had the opportunity to go do that. But I hold those up as different views of how to do that. One was woefully unsuccessful from a people perspective, and the other one was very successful, because I think you have to take that time to have those conversations, and more than just the conversations, you have to paint the picture so vividly that your team can see themselves in that new reality.
Boy, that is such sage advice, Jeff. I mean, it really is. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, one of the things we forget is the most critical component. It is the people. And here's what I'm talking about. It's no different than what you're mentioning. For example, one of the things that we really believe in Checkpoint is the consolidation, that organizations now really, with all that's been going on and the fact that every device is hyper connected to the other and everything's going through the cloud, the fact is we ought to stop and look at unifying, harmonizing, if you will, our cybersecurity and leverage a more common threat intelligence. This is something we believe. But one of the things that we've discovered is when we go in and talk to a client, someone like yourself, that may be music to your ears. Jeff, CIO, we're going to talk to you about reducing the number of interfaces, reducing the number of vendors, reducing the number of contracts, right? Those are all good things.
Yep, they are.
But having that same discussion with the network engineer or network manager or security manager may not get received the same way because they may think, I'm going to be out of a job.
Yeah.
They're not going to need me. So the fact that you took the time and went to the human resource and said, listen, we're going to make these changes so that you can, I guess I was thinking when you were talking about the email, I was thinking it's not a product, it's a solution for the business. And you're not, a mechanic for a particular product, right, but you're a maintenance man for our information systems, right? It's just understanding how they look at themselves. And I think that that's really, really great advice, that people understand none of this technology works without them.
That's right. That's right. So much of what we need to do as IT leaders, whether we're on the CIO side of the desk or whether we're on the technology provider, service provider side of the desk, is we need to communicate at the right level, right? The right messaging in the right way, and help the other side of the desk understand what we're saying and what we're seeing from a technology perspective. That's one of the reasons why I work with Intervision today, is I bring them that perspective of the CIO. What is the CIO thinking? What's important to them? Not that I can dare say I speak for all CIOs. I know a lot of them, but I think it brings that unique perspective that perhaps they don't always see. And as you were just mentioning, you sit down with a network engineer and say, I'm going to eliminate all these different kinds of devices. They're going to be like, what am I supposed to do? Right. And if you can paint a picture differently, not in the same way you would paint it for the CIO, but talk about the advantages to them of what they're going to be able to do because you've done this, made this easier. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, and I just really think, as I think even more through your words, they're spot on in how you present change, right? Because you can make that decision in the boardroom and then present it with a list of these are the actions we're taking, right? Without any context. And that's what clearly will result in people saying, hey, well, you're deciding to go a different way, and that's not me. I'm an exchange guy. As opposed to presenting it in a context that everyone that's on the bus, so to speak, understands they contribute. And you're gonna free them up. You're truly going to release them and enable them to be focused on more productive things for the business, as opposed to being mired in the little minutia. At least that, to me, I'm going to be leaning in to hear more about these changes.
Exactly, because you get bought in, and you even mentioned the board level. And I know we were talking earlier about some of the metrics and KPIs, and I think sometimes we in IT are our own worst enemy, because we always talk in terms of the technology. It's how many tickets did we solve? It's what was our uptime percentage? It was how many threats did we block? Right? The business, the C-suite, the CEO, the board, they don't care.
Right.
All they care about is that the technology was there when they needed it.
Right.
Right. And so we have to talk in terms of, I'm going to go back to retail again, just because I found some of that McKinsey report so fascinating. But if you're talking in terms of retail and you want to promote your uptime percentage, great. But do it in the number of sales per hour, per square foot in your stores that you were able to enable because you were up and operational. That will get the attention of the board, not, hey, our network was up 99.999% of the time. Because if the time that you're down is Black Friday, no one's going to care that you were up the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It reminds me, Jeff, when I worked for this Apple dealership, Quantum Computers, this was before I went to work for Apple, had a fantastic trainer. His name was Ron Reed. This guy was just amazing. And I still today remember this and use it. And this is what I think of when you tell me that. So what? What Ron taught was when you go and you tell someone, hey, we had 99% uptime. If you can, in the back of your mind, say to yourself, so what? And you haven't answered that, you've told them nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And he described it in the context, you understand, back in, the early mid 80s, it was all about, we've got this much memory and this kind of processor and this much clock speed and this much RAM and this much ROM, right? I mean, all this stuff. And it was like, so what?
So what?
And that's what I think of when it's a great reminder when we go into the boardroom. Right? When we're reporting to the executives, it's not about all those numbers. It's so what? How's it helping my business? So what?
Yes.
That's great advice. So, hey, I want to ask about amplifying my value and amplifying my job search. Let's talk a little bit about Amplify. I'm looking at the cover of Amplify Your Value, Leading IT with Strategic Vision. This is a book you wrote?
Yes. So that book came out in 2018, and it encompasses a lot of the messaging that we've been talking about today, Grant, in that it's, as a CIO, how do you understand the business at a deep enough level that you know how the business makes money? And sometimes that seems obvious, but what's the go-to-market strategy? What are the customers like? What's the buying process your customers go through? It's how do you understand the vision and the strategy of your company so that you and your team can build a vision for the technology aspects, develop strategies that help get you on the road to that vision, and then how do you execute upon that vision? And so in that book, you'll find a lot of stories, but a lot of useful information about how to do that. The other book you mentioned was Amplify Your Job Search. That just came out in August. It is not specifically focused on the IT professional. It's really for any professional who is either in a job search or contemplating a job search. And it was written in reaction to the pandemic. I was writing a different book in January and February of 2020. And in March, I started to see what was happening, and I started to see the reductions in force and the furloughs and everything that was going to be happening to people's jobs. I put that other book on the digital shelf, and I started writing Amplify Your Job Search. And it's really it's a culmination of, I've never been in HR. I'm not a recruiter. That's not my skill set, but my skill set is I've been a job seeker multiple times throughout my career.
Yep.
I've been a hiring manager. I would be hard pressed to recount the number of people that I've hired over the years. And I've mentored and coached people on their job search for the last 12 or 15 years. So all of those lessons learned are encompassed in Amplify your job search. And it's really a way to put a job search on its head and make it a laser focused approach. So rather than looking specifically for openings, you're looking for industries, companies, and openings. Mm-hmm. So you are laser focused on the job that you're trying to find.
Yeah, boy. And, that's another thing, isn't it, with the whole pandemic? There's just a number of interesting things that I think you pointed out presented opportunities, really positive things that are a result of it. I mean, God forbid, I fortunately, knock on wood, don't know anyone directly that was severely impacted or lost their life, but it's been horrible. But the flip side is, we really have learned quite a lot. I mean, as a CIO, if I told you we used to have a travel and expense budget of pick a number of millions. Through the course of the year, Jeff, we reduced that number by 97%.
Yeah.
But we still made our numbers. We still delivered our message. We still created the as many or maybe more qualified leads. So my question is, it's 2021 and things are starting to get unbridled again. Are you fine as the CIO just going back to the way it used to be, spending those tens of millions of dollars, flying all around, spending those tens of thousands of dollars, paying for events?
That is the billion-dollar question, right? Is what's going to happen next? And the thing that I look to is some of this, you're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yep.
The work from anywhere concept and remote work that so many people were, as you described earlier, forced into implementing, found out that it really does work. Organizations such as yours found out that, hey, you don't have to fly sales reps all over the country to hit your numbers. Yep. So maybe we've learned some lessons from this that we can apply and change the way that work gets done in the future. You were talking about migration to the cloud, and let's just do a lift and shift and get it there is the wrong way to approach. And so similarly to that, this approach is let's not just take the way work used to get done and force it into this work from home world, or let's try to force everybody back. Let's figure out the way work gets done in the future. And let's build that together as business partners, business colleagues to make that happen. And I think as I look around, the companies that were more successful, I wouldn't say exclusively, in the last year, took the approach of let's see how we can do things in this new world. They were also probably fairly well on their cloud journey. I'm not seeing statistics per se on that, but I do know companies that were already in the cloud had less of a challenge of making the pivot
no question.
In the last year than some of the others. And I know that Intervision saw a pretty good uptick in those companies who wanted to accelerate their migration to the cloud because of what was going on. So I think cloud's a good part of this, but it's also re-envisioning the way work gets done.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, the question I've asked in the past is, imagine holding right now in your hands a rubber band that maybe it's let's say it's 1.5 inches wide, maybe 4 inches in diameter. So it's pretty thick, pretty heavy duty rubber band. And you put your hands in and you stretch it as far as you can. And then you let go. That rubber band has nearly 100% memory. Very close, right? It goes back to just about where it was before you started pulling. And that's how I set up the question, Jeff, how much memory will our day-to-day operations have once this rubber band is fully collapsed back to its old way. And so it's just putting another way to the same question of, how are we going to, because for me, I struggle as a business person. If I had a bunch of employees and I was able to demonstrate it, I understand you want to go back and see customers, but it seems like there's not going to be 100% memory. I'm going to find there's going to be a higher level of scrutiny on why and when those events are occurring and that money's being spent. At least it seems like it.
I think you're right. I hope at least we've stretched the rubber band just a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, beyond its original shape by what's gone on in the last year.
Yeah, me too. Because, I'm unusual because I've worked from home for a long, long time. But right now, in fact, I've spoke at more than 2 times the number of events in front of equally as many more people virtually than I did live. Now, of course, it's not as good, but maybe sometimes it is. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how things play out over the course of the next year or two for sure.
Yes, I agree. I agree totally.
I've really enjoyed talking with you. If you've got a couple more minutes, I'd love to hear your thoughts because I know, I work for the vendor, have been in the vendor side. I suspect I have a few listeners. I want to move and just hear your thoughts on the dialogue and discussions you recommend with the C-suite and in particular the CIO as it relates to security. Because I think some people stumble on, we've got this role, the CIO, but then we have this role, CISO. What's the interplay there? How should we interact with and what should we emphasize? What's the so what for the CIO versus the CISO?
That is such a great question. And it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier is tailoring the message for the audience. The CIO is in a different situation in that he or she is not only responsible for security, even if there is a CISO on board, but in a lot of organizations, they may not even have a dedicated role for that yet. But they have the responsibility for security, but they also have the responsibility to enable the employees to get work done. They also have the responsibility for enabling customers to interact with the organization. And so they're playing this balancing act between tightening down every single control that you can tighten down and opening up Pandora's box, right? They have to balance that all day long. And so as a security vendor, being empathetic to that role and identifying to the CIO how it helps him or her on both sides of that scale,
right,
is the right way to position it. Right, we're going to help you here with the security, but it's going to enable ease of use or whatever the dynamic is for that particular organization that's important to them on the other side. So you've got to give both messages, not one or the other.
So it's kind of like what we were talking about before, right? The CIO is looking through the lens of technology, and as a vendor, I need to be able to understand what you are seeing on the other side of that lens and how my product or services can actually improve your business objectives getting through that, right?
Absolutely. Know me and know my business. Because if you know both of those, you're going to be able to talk to me in the way that I need to hear it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how many salespeople will just ring up Jeff and start rattling off on their great product or service and have not really done any investigation onto you and what matters to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, we could do a whole episode on vendor relationships.
Vendor protocol?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, the one thing we know is you don't talk to anybody unless you have their mobile number, because who takes a phone call anymore from the desk line?
Exactly.
Jeff, this has been so terrific. I really have enjoyed getting to know you and speak with you. And I'm going to get your book. I want to read the Amplify Your Value. I'm on that right away. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you very, very much for taking so much time with us today.
My pleasure, Grant. It's been enjoyable. I was introduced to your program a week or so ago and just love it. I've listened to several episodes, so I'm going to promote this within my network for sure. It's a great program. And for the listeners out there, if you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, JTun Indy. Really easy to find on LinkedIn, JTun INDY, or you can find me on Intervision's website and listen to some of the stuff that we've talked about there as well.
Yeah, and what I'll do, Jeff, is I'll put a link to your LinkedIn in the description when I publish this, if that's okay.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. Yes, thank you.
Outstanding. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we did it again, and another great episode. Jeff Tun, thank you again. It was really outstanding. You are a great guest, and I sure hope we can have you back again sometime.
Thanks for having me, Grant.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for being here, Jeff. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very, very much. You know, I really do appreciate you listening, sharing, subscribing, telling your friends, and we'll look forward to having you back on the next episode of Talking Cloud.
Yeah.